Hello there, and welcome to episode 2 of Digital Dialogues. I'm Rene Grosdanovski, and in each episode, I'll be taking you on a journey through some of the biggest digital questions in asset-intensive industries today. Each episode will focus on a different topic, and each will have some interesting guests, providing expert and real-life insight into the topic at hand. The aim is to unpack each topic and discuss in detail what they mean for you and your organization, regardless of where you are on your journey. Let me also take to join our LinkedIn group to stay up to date and continue the dialogue. You'll receive an invite after this. Well, and thanks to COVID, this is a virtual meetup. And with us labeling episode 1 as MVP of this brave new virtual world, we asked you for feedback. Well, we heard you, we incorporated these, and today's segment should see some of these come through. But as always, we want to hear more from you, so keep the suggestions coming. Time to get going. In this episode, we're exploring the world of asset maturity, and more specifically, how does one move up the asset maturity curve? What we know is that most of our asset-intensive industry customers strive to do so. There's also a common acceptance that moving up the maturity curve requires transformation, often in the digital form, thus making digital transformation an important focus point for any organization wanting to move up the maturity curve. But what does it actually mean? How and why do people assess it? And how are some of our customers progressing on their journey? This is part of this digital challenge. Forbes defines digital transformation as being a customer-centric initiative that often requires upskilling on technical practices and making organizational changes to ensure that all work is focused on value and customer satisfaction. To me, in this case of asset-intensive businesses, this is linked back to asset maturity by the role their assets play in the service they provide to their customers. As a good example of the emergence of this concept is things like digital twins, taking vast sets of data, both real and historic, combined with the cutting-edge UI to support more robust decision-making. Yes, some of this may still seem like sci-fi today, but so did Netflix and Uber only a few years ago. Regardless of whether you and or your organization is focusing on digital twins as part of their digital transformation strategy or not, what is clear that we are all on a digital transformation journey right now, and through it climbing the asset maturity curve. For those of you that have been working in the asset management space for many years, the term will be nothing new, even feel familiar. But how many of you actually know or understand how your organization assesses its maturity? From my experience, it's often highly subjective, can vary greatly within a short time frame. And so how do organizations draw actual conclusion from such assessments to help them plan their next 3 to 5 years? And of course, there is COVID-19 and the impact that it is having on the need to transform, with some suggesting that it is the disruptor and the reason for a bigger than ever focus on transformation, digital or otherwise. And due to impact on processes and the lack of direct access to years of know-how, maturity is more important than ever. Well, there was a lot of questions and certainly more than answers. Luckily, I'm only here to ask these and not answer them directly. For that, as always, I have a panel of experts who I will be asking the tough questions of on your behalf. Finally, don't forget to engage with the polls below. They allow us to ensure we can align future episodes and content around what matters most to you. With me here today, I have Dave Roberts, Asset Data Manager at KiwiRail, Grant Newton, System Information Manager at Transpower, who will be trying to join us via the phone, and my colleague, Martin van der Zayden, Solution Director at Certus Digital. Dave, Martin, a little bit about you guys.
Dave.
Yeah. Hey everybody, Dave Roberts here. I'm KiwiRail. I've been at KiwiRail for the last 12 years or so. Started my life as a photogrammetrist, making maps from aerial photographs, mapping the rail centre line, incidentally, back in 1987. Even doing the transmission lines for for Transpower or its predecessor. I kind of fell into the asset data management as technical analyst at the time we were implementing Maximo as an asset management system. And I've been with them through that build phase, and now I guess I'm just trying to wrangle the data that the business needs to support its asset management investment decisions. Martin?
Thanks, Dave. Martin van der Zayden. Well, it seems like yesterday, but 42 years ago when I started out as a maintenance technician on power stations, working at the sharp end of asset maturity, and many of those assets were extremely mature. I was eventually seduced by the warmth of offices and started doing design engineering with, oddly enough, Transpower, or Electricity Corporation as it was then. And ultimately became seduced by the bright, shiny lights of the world of what we called in the 80s data processing, which became the even sexier ICT. And I guess across that time, I've been really fortunate to have had roles where I've been able to be an architect of process change, automation, optimization, people change, and also delivered solutions into organizations undergoing change, so being on the other side of the desk. So the end result of that is that I've developed this deeply held, not always correct, but deeply held belief that transformation in itself and moving up the asset maturity curve as a form of transformation achieves nothing if people still end up doing the same things in a different system or process. And so today's presentation, mercifully short, is about talking through what it might be, what asset maturity might be, and what the reasons for doing it are. Do you want me to carry on?
Thank you, Martin. No need to. I guess thank you both for your little intro. I didn't actually know that you both crossed paths, I guess, kind of through Transpower, or well, what it was at the time. Before I hand over to Martin, who I know is excited to tell us all about this, and you can probably tell that by his intro, let me just remind you all that, as always, this is an interactive session. There's a QA facility to the right of the stream, so feel free to engage with me and the expert throughout, including during the presentation. I'm counting on you guys to ask some tricky questions and make them sweat a little bit. With that, I'd like to hand over to Martin to give us an overview on asset maturity and how does it move up? How does one move up that curve? Martin?
Thanks, Rene. So asset maturity, if we move to the first slide, I think we've overused the term asset maturity, and maybe the second slide then, as a reason for change. You know, we've used it through the last 20 years of introducing solutions into utilities and infrastructure and asset-intensive organisations as the reason. Because there's often not a compelling reason to put in an asset management system or to review the data quality or the data integrity. It's very hard to find a business case. So moving up the asset maturity curve has been used as a replacement for having a true purpose for doing some of these things. It is, however, a really useful lens for making sense of the benefits that we're looking to harness. If we look at the curve itself, you know, from level 1 to level 5, and the titles for the various levels change through the various curves, but effectively at level 1, it's chaos and the data is everywhere and processes all over the place. Very little is mandated, and it's left very much for designers, planners, implementers, and maintainers to do their own thing, applying their professional skills. Level 5, on the other hand, is very much like science fiction, and I've heard it described when it's been presented to groups, technologies that support it, like self-healing process, models, deep machine learning, artificial intelligence. They sound great, and they are great, and they will be great. But right now, it just sounds like it's very hard in the context of not necessarily having all the data. So most of our perception around Australia and New Zealand is that businesses are stuck between having a much better platform. They've spent the last 10 years building better platforms of process and information that they can use to monitor the performance and the condition of their assets and use that to plan how best to spend their constrained budgets. going up the curve into the prediction is a real step up, because suddenly it requires a great deal more data, and then obviously level 4 and 5, another level again. So in the last 10 years, we've spent on consolidating our knowledge of process and data and asset condition, and focusing on process automation. The next 10 years, it seems like the next 10 years will be focused on developing our insights. So analytics, understanding what the patterns mean for individual assets, but also for groups of assets or classes of assets, and hierarchies of assets, and how they collectively deliver a service. Process augmentation, almost certainly. Artificial intelligence, linking in spatial and building information models and digital twins will certainly become part of it. But that probably is those technologies are at the peak of hype, and it could take another decade for them to be fully ingrained into the day-to-day. If I could have the next slide, please. So businesses still, in that context, they still need a compelling event to commit to change. And having an asset maturity curve decreasingly is that compelling event. So transformation tends to be a bit lumpy between compelling events. They could be earthquakes, they could be major plant failures, they could be pandemics, and we're experiencing a very disruptive period of time at the moment that we're overcoming with techniques such as what we're doing today, different ways of communicating with each other, which most of us find quite unusual. I find quite unusual, but exciting as well. But it's those compelling events that make business leaders take notice, stand up, and the normal disruptions, the known risks or competitive behavior don't seem on their own to have enough weight to trigger innovation. But getting up the asset maturity curve demands more than technology, and it has probably taken me a while to work that out. I always, I'm a great advocate of new technology to drive new process, to drive new behaviors. But the reality is that it takes more. That the culture needs to change. People need to do different things at the end of a process, otherwise they won't have transformed. The technology needs to be there to enable, and I had a debate with a colleague just yesterday about whether technology was a driver or an enabler. I mean, it may be both, but in this context, I'm saying that technology is an enabler. Culture, need, compelling events are the drivers. People ultimately need those things. They need technologies to deliver new process in their hands. And if we move to the next slide. So what's working? We're lucky to be involved in a range of activities that give us access to people's successes, but we also see a lot of what people are trying and are not failing at, but not getting the outcomes that they expected. So there's a number of surveys that all say the same thing. There's an awful lot of money being spent on transformation and asset maturity projects. And most of them, the large majority are failing. And why? And they're failing because they're often taken in isolation. The technology may prove to be correct. The IoT device, the harvesting of live information may prove to be a really useful way of triggering maintenance activities. But on its own, it doesn't build enough of a business case, or it doesn't contribute to enough process change, or it doesn't sort out one of the corporate drivers or any of the strategic initiatives that an organization may have. So these proof of concepts are useful. They're helping us work our way through, but they don't deliver change, and therefore they don't get us up the asset maturity curve. So to try and, we're trying to quantify the outcomes that are aligned with corporate direction. So if we're looking for things to succeed, which is on the next slide, if we're looking at ways of being more successful, accelerating our transformation, accelerating the move up the maturity curve. We need to look at quantifiable outcomes. So what is it? What technologies, what processes, what business outcomes contribute to a real reduction of risk, contribute to the ability to prove that you require more capital or OPEX to your funder, to improve the way you provide regulatory reporting, which takes pressure off pricing, off monopoly pricing, to provide a discernible increase in health and safety performance. All things that organisations hold near and dear to their hearts, or to open a new marketplace. So some of the transformation accelerators that we've seen evidence of working are, collaboration. You can't do it in isolation. You need to have buy-in from finance. You need to have buy-in from the customer care area. You need to have finance from the regulatory risk management. It's not just an engineering decision, even if it's an engineering process that you're trying to work on. They have to be linked in terms of the compelling events. They have to be linked into organization-wide objectives. Telling a good story, building stories around the programs. Not that we've automated the maintenance of the pump out of Block A, but the automation of that maintenance has allowed 1,000 customers to irrigate more effectively. Those sort of things tend to have a bigger impact than automating a pump. And then one of the other things we've seen is that the application of technologies traditionally it's been expensive and difficult to convince the organisation to buy into, even enough for a proof of concept. But cloud-based technologies and subscription platforms change all of that. You end up with pre-configured technologies that are similar to the ones you have, that you pump your data into. You can establish without corporate the inertia involved in setting up resources within the corporate. And so organisations that are being successful are being inventive, creative about how they stand up proof of concepts. And I've got one more before I stop roving on, start getting some questions. I've got one more slide which just talks about specific examples of things that we've seen. So going back to a bit of motherhood statement, start with the end in mind. Funding and revenue profit are the great motivators. Everybody likes them. And as are regulatory drivers, because having regulatory compliance issues are time consuming. They grind out a lot of management overhead and a lot of analytic response that if you don't have to do it you could spend it on much more productive things. Talent gap and aging workforce, it's on the minds of most boards of directors and most CEs, and ultimately it should be on the minds of everybody, because there is a sort of a singularity coming where a lot of the people who currently provide the glue between the legacy knowledge and the inbound skills within organizations are getting to the point where they want to do other things. Not necessarily retire, but they want to do other things. And the organizations need to harvest that knowledge about how things really work and how things get fixed before they get to that point. There's plenty of disruptive technology and plenty of competition, and it's easy to get into a defensive mindset around it. But looking at how you can embrace it to be competitive and disruptive in your own right is a mindset that's much more useful when it comes to asset maturity and transformation. There's a couple of examples that really stood out for us recently, and we have talked about them with customers, so we won't go into too much depth. But one in particular where they wanted to trial mobile and building information management and spatial management, and in the end, the way they got to do that was to focus on driving improved information behind their budget applications for OPEX and CAPEX. So rather than looking at asset condition, asset performance, the outcome was to provide better information to allow them to petition for bigger budgets to do more work. And they were successful. So the next stage of that, of course, becomes, okay, now how do I resource that? And so suddenly you've got a compelling event. So the proof of concept actually provided the fuel to drive the compelling event, which is great. And we've got a number of initiatives that are up and running at the moment that have been only able to be done because we can stand them up in weeks, days, in fact, and start getting outcomes from the proof of concept, proof of technology, process transformation, process prototyping. We can get outputs, tangible outputs that people can see with their own data within weeks. And so one of the lessons we've learned from that is we can be a lot more incremental about, we don't have to boil the ocean. We can probably just pick out small parts of a large process transformation, a large asset maturity initiative, and pick them off one by one. So generate good outcomes quickly. So with that, look, just a recap. Asset maturity, we tend to overuse it as its importance. It's a great lens to consolidate the initiatives that you have around running your business better. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. But it's important to keep it in the context of corporate initiatives and turn them into a more frequent innovation program that can be funded year on year, and bring in a wider range of business to participate. Questions?
Thank you, Martin. That certainly shed some light on it for me. I guess I took a couple of things away from what you just said. The first one that stood out to me straight away was the focus on outcomes. Yeah, I think you said that obviously technology, just implement technology for the guy to do the same thing in a different way isn't an outcome. It's really what difference does that make in terms of process, in terms of availability, in terms of what we deliver to our clients or the service. So. And I think that applies very commonly these days, where people tend to, I guess, confuse, movement or momentum with progress. And so that's a big takeaway for me. And I guess, from that perspective, I think more people need to focus on I guess, their business initiatives a bit more. Dave, listening to Martin's presentation, what's your take on this from a client, I guess, who is on their journey, or dare I say, climbing their curve?
Well, absolutely correct, Martin. It's easy to focus on the technology as the driver. I quite agree that technology is the enabler. It's usually a significant emotional event internally, or an external cataclysm, a major earthquake or a pandemic, etc. That forces the business to react and say, well, hey, we need more information, or we need to do this better. I would agree that there is an element of driver in the technology if we have asset managers who know their business but have their head outside of the business and are seeing this technology as it comes on stream and try and join the dots and say, well, hey, how can I use this new drone technology with a LiDAR to solve one of my business problems? So, but again, that's people with vision. The other element of the technology as a driver, I think, is it can, in that sense, it can be a catalyst, because as you start to look at it and use it, it creates its own snowball effect, I suppose, and you just keep rolling with the technology.
That's a valid point. I guess the other thing I took away from Martin's presentation was, and I really don't like the term because I guess I consider it negative, but just fail fast. You mentioned prototypes, POCs, that kind of stuff. And I think, I guess, though, if you forget the term that I don't like, what we're really saying is, these initiatives need to be sharp and focused and have an evaluation criteria that is easy to assess, rather than being drawn out programs that essentially end up like a road to nowhere and people get fatigued from doing them in general. Is that correct? Was that the assessment?
Is that me, Martin?
Sorry, I guess the question was probably for you, Dave.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely. The fail fast is an interesting term. Certainly we need to be agile and fleet of foot. We need to be able to quickly size up the technology or the opportunity, the fit for the problem we have, and see it and see if it will actually solve our problem. I guess the fail fast is quickly determine that it is or isn't going to work and get out if it isn't. I think there's an element also of, you've got to dip your toe in the water, and the water's always warmer once you're in. And the snowball is you get into it and you solve the problem, and you get to that point, you do get an outcome. And one of the outcomes there is you might actually decide to change direction. So rather than having a view of the next 20 years, you've got a view kind of where you need to be, but in a year's time, the ground will have shifted.
That's a very valid point.
I liked when we were talking before, Dave, you were talking about isolated pockets of innovation occurring. And so you'd have a local problem that a group of people got around and they solved it, and then they were doing something differently to the rest of the organization, but they were doing it better. But there was no sort of thought of sharing that. And I think that's what innovation is within organizations. Someone has a vision, someone gets up and does something about it, but then they stop. They solve what they think is the problem, but they never take it back into the organization and say, hey, what about trying this? What about absorbing this as the new normal?
Yeah, I guess that is the flip side of that. I actually had a question come through from one of our online viewers, so I thought I'll pass that through because it's in relation to your presentation, I believe, originally, Martin. But the question is, technology can be seen as a driver for maturity uplift. Is that valid? Probably an extension of the conversation we just had, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I still think of it as an enabler. I think it's a vital enabler because there are insights, for example, analysis, insight, predictive, artificial intelligence, deep machine learning. You just can't do it without technology platforms. Mobile, you can't. You couldn't even the humble asset register that we've spent the last 10 years perfecting would be nothing without the ontologies, the locations, the assets, the attributions, the location priorities, work priorities, the things that go into the humble asset register. So technology is part of it, but it's dangerous in IT. There's a parallel in development that if you're developing something that's the best, the whizziest app in the world, but nobody ever buys it, you can't take any joy out of that. And it's the same with technology. You might have the best platform, the best integration, the best data model, but if nobody's using it to actually improve the business, then you failed. And so you've probably spent a great deal of money failing.
Yeah, probably. And I guess, so really what we were saying is, you can't do without technology, but I guess singularly relying on that technology isn't the answer either.
I think what we continually underestimate the importance of technology in the hands of the user, and when we think technology, we often think the planners, the designers, in an engineering sense anyway, in a maintenance sense, we often think about the planners, but But what about the schedulers? What about the workshop supervisors? What about the team leaders? What about the individuals that are actually laying track or building transmission towers or splicing cables or installing fiber? That's where the productivity really lives. And they've got their eyes on the assets, and not only are they delivering assets, but they're in touch with the assets every day. And they're also in touch with the health and safety issues. They're in touch with process problems. The delays in getting switching instructions, the incorrect material they get sent. So putting better technology into the hands of at the end of the delivery chain is something we collectively as an industry have started, but there's a long way to go.
That's probably many things.
We talk about wearables. We think, are they hot? Are they cold? Did they fall 2 meters? Are they still moving? But how does that influence the overall service they deliver and their utilization and the efficiency and the accuracy of their work?
Yeah. I've got something for Dave here. I guess globally, it seems the transformation and the enabling technologies are sort of topical at the moment and have been for many years, but compelling success stories seem to be fairly rare. I guess, Dave, from your perspective or from your experience, why do you think that is?
Well, I think what happens is the new technology, or it could even be old technology that somebody's reinvented, is suddenly launched with great fanfare and a pizzazz. But the reality is the implementation of these technologies tends to be incremental, especially if we're talking about fail fast or being more fleet of foot. The implementations are incremental. So there isn't any great fanfare or success story. There's no massive transformation over that in the short term that the life of that implementation takes. Let's say it's a year. It's actually only when you look back at it after at the end of the year or 2 years or 5 years where you realize, wow, we've come a very long way. But by that time, there's I guess there's no wham bam success story to talk about. It's just we're in a constant continuous improvement, and that's nothing to rave about.
So in a way, really, I mean, it's just an output of how one goes about it. I mean, that's exactly what we've been talking about. We talked about making it smaller, bite-sized chunks, and being continuous. You mentioned the word continuous improvement, but yet somehow, because of the term of digital transformation, I guess people expect this, like I said, this big fanfare. I think you referred to it as, this big thing where this has changed the world. This program we ran has changed the world, and maybe, as you say, change is constant and I guess small by nature, which is exactly what you want as an organization. And yet over time, if you say, like you say, if you look back, 3, 4, or 5 years ago, what we've achieved, there probably would be that big impact. There would be that fanfare, but I guess it's just by the nature of how we're approaching this.
Indeed. And we're not all reading the Gartner quadrants to see what all the blue chip success stories are. We're actually figuring out how we can get our workforce, 30% of whom are going to retire in the next 5 years, how we're going to get them and newcomers on our track and telling us the condition of the asset. That's not sexy.
Depends on the definition, I guess.
Well,
Martin, asset maturity curve. It's often used as a subjective assessment of how well an organization know their asset portfolios and tailor-made their maintenance and replacement programs to optimize performance. How is this evaluated and dealt with in your experience?
Everything seems to go very quiet.
I hope you heard my question.
I didn't, but you said something about it being subjective, the asset maturity curve. Look, it is. And it could be. but I've also seen it, and there are analogies of the asset maturity curve built into all the standards, the ISO standards, the PAS 55. So it can get very deep and get very detailed as well. But in the end, it is a lens, and the important thing, I think, is to have a framework that works for your business, and that will stand the test of time, maybe a decade, which means it has to be aligned with your the business plan and the corporate statement of intent and strategies. So it can't, and it has to be realistic. Right, so this whole science fiction of level 5 of just about every asset maturity plan. Some people say we want to be level 5. We have no idea what that means. We have no idea what it's going to cost. So our ambition really is to get to level 3.75, and for us, level 3.75 means we meet these criteria, and we think that that's worth a percentage of EBITDA, or it's worth a reduction in our operating costs, or it's worth an increase in our regulated asset base. So having strong measures around the framework, because once again, then it's not abstract. It becomes part of a corporate framework for innovation and transformation.
Oh, that's very valid, and it kind of leads me into what would be my next question, I guess, because one of the things we are berated with a huge amount of choice. Technology is everywhere. The next trend is just around the corner. I guess maybe a question for Dave here in terms of from a customer's perspective. How are technology opportunities presented, promoted, evaluated, and eventually sponsored?
Yeah, well, I think that runs the whole gamut of from feral IT, I guess, if I can use the term that Martin was talking about before, where people in some remote office are solving a local problem, through to a well-defined technology roadmap, I guess. I'm a believer that in the need for a central, let's call it a steering body or an evaluation body. So people are free to try their local ideas or recognize some technology and think this is a good idea. They should be able to present that to a more central body with some evidence. So these things can be handled in a coordinated manner. Hey, yeah, we'll let you go away and spend 20% of your time for the next 6 months figuring this out, because we think that thing might have legs and be a good return. We have to accept the risk that there's going to be no return, but the rewards, if we get it right, are significant. The key is to harness all the energy and vision that individuals distributed around the organisation have, and allow them some free rein within some boundaries, and try and if something's successful, say, well, we're running a railway up in Auckland, well, we run one down to Dunedin, so surely the issues and the opportunities are the same here. We should share that. I think it's important that the organisation has a technology roadmap for asset management, to spell out where we think we're going and what we think we need to do to advance up the maturity curve, if that's what we're paying attention to, because that allows us to evaluate opportunities and crises as they come along, and make some sensible decisions about where we should step to next.
That seems like it makes sense. I guess as a follow-up from that, though, then do you see the asset maturity curve, and you mentioned the roadmap just now, is there a link between that and investor confidence?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is. We're finding we are getting better. Well, we're getting the squeeze from investor, in our case that's either our significant freight customers, and if you like, all of New Zealand, the taxpayer who's investing in the railway. And people want to know that the money is being well spent, so that we are actually renewing the asset and maintaining it to minimise or mitigate, avoid health and safety issues. And so we're not just constantly renewing the same piece of railway and letting the rest fall down. So certainly the investor, the treasury, the auditors do want to look into it. Absolutely, maturity is linked to investor confidence. If as you rise up the maturity curve, be it at an organizational level or just within, perhaps you might even be looking at a asset data maturity level. As you advance up there, your decisions become better decisions, hopefully, but your investors are going to have trust the decisions you're recommending, the approach you recommend. Absolutely, there is a link between those two things.
And I guess you raise a valid point. When it's public money, like you said, I'm a New Zealander. I'm certainly not interested. All of a sudden, like, how are you spending? How are you spending the dollars? I guess. I guess I do want to ask one more question before we sort of wind this up slowly. Martin mentioned earlier about the difference between just using technology and doing the same thing again, I guess, and doing things differently. So I guess I want to ask about your organization. When new technology is adopted, is it seen as a way to do the same stuff but more efficiently, or is there a desire to change the actual asset management practices and thus transform?
Good question, and I think as always the answer is all of the above. In some cases, we are just trying to do something more efficiently, more effectively. In other cases, we are, when we pay attention to it, we are actually trying to change the way we do it. The trick, I think, is to when you need people within the business who have the vision or that there is a better way of doing this. If you've come up through the ranks, I guess, and it's perhaps too easy to get stuck in, well, this is the process, this is the way we always do it. And I think a lot of organizations will be like that. So sometimes you do need the disruption.
And it does kind of go back to the original plan, doesn't it? We spoke about how opportunities are assessed. I guess it goes back to that, right? If you assess the opportunity as such that it will be one that doesn't have necessarily a transformational impact, but it is maybe an enabler for something down the road, that in itself may be a satisfactory outcome that you're seeking. And as long as you enter that with open eyes, I guess that is okay, isn't it?
Absolutely. I guess every initiative needs to be tagged with what does good look like? What is the outcome? What are we actually trying to achieve here? If we are simply trying to do the same thing but better, that's okay. If we go into it with eyes wide open, we should always be open to the opportunity or the need to change tack along the way. Yeah.
And it's important to know when's good enough. When to stop, basically.
Indeed, yeah.
When you
stop, the roadmap is. I think the roadmap is essential because it allows you to judge everything that comes, most things that come along from left field, judge them with where you want to be. To constantly say, are we on track? Do we need to change where we want to go?
I guess it is that point back at what you wanted, that, as you said, where you wanted to be, and having a continuous assessment or a yardstick, right, to ensure that you are still on the right track. Because it is very easy to get lost to perfectionism, right? You seem like you over-engineering solutions, and realistically, you get to the point where it feels like the right thing to do, and it may even be the right thing to do from a point-to-point solution, but realistically, there's no longer any organizational value. Certainly, as a broader outcome, it's no longer there often.
A good, I suppose, a good example, or a good example of a bad approach is we have a very manual weekly inspection process. Somebody goes and eyeballs a section of track every week. They're basically looking for the bricks that are going to upset things. Now we can. One thing that's obvious is we've got trains running up and down our railway line every day. That's the whole point. So why don't we stick technology on the front of the train or elsewhere that can effectively be the eyes and ears and perhaps a little more precise inspection of the track as it runs along it every day. So we head down that approach, and it was too easy for us to pull out of the drawer our current operating procedures or rules, and that were written for a manual personal inspection, and hand those over as the requirements for an automated inspection regime that is capable of measuring to 10 millimeter precision. So that's doomed to failure if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
Because all you are doing is replacing boots on the track with data which hasn't allowed you to move any further forward.
Yeah, that's a really, really good example, because it's exactly that.
And we've gone through quite a long time without talking about data, but data is the common currency here, isn't it? I mean, the whatever you do now, you've got to invest in your data, because it's going to drive all of these initiatives in the future.
Indeed, if you don't know about it, if you can't, starting my life as making maps, I held the view that if you knew where it was and you could put it on a map, you could control it. The earliest camp followers were in fact surveyors, I suspect, that went along with the army. If you knew where it was, you could manage it. And data is the same thing. You can't control your asset. You're not managing your asset if you don't know what it is. You might know it's a pump, but what's the pump doing?
I quite like it, because it's a beautiful segue into my next episode, really, isn't it? You guys didn't even know about this, so thank you for that. I want to take a moment to thank you, Dave and Martin, for making time today to discuss this topic with me and help me, and I guess hopefully all the rest of the people out there understand this topic a little better. The drive to move up the maturity curve has been one on the cards of asset-intensive industries for many years, and not even decades. The way you go about it, the approaches and technologies we use may have changed, but in essence, what remains is a constant, it would appear, is our focus on people and our customers. And that will never change, I believe. I hope all of you enjoyed episode 2, moving up the asset management maturity curve. The next episode is one I personally find very interesting. And at times we'll build on what we heard just today, giving us given the importance and size of the topic. It will be a 2-part episode focusing on a single view of the asset. So I really hope you can all make it, and I get to see you all again in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you.
Thanks.